Ads are coming to ChatGPT. We have seen a load of different testing that OpenAI are doing. We've also just seen Sam Altman come out with a code red message. So big announcement from them saying actually the ads might be delayed and there is going to be a focus on improving ChatGPT. On top of that, we have now had a load of different people in the community thinking that placements are ads, and there's been a ton of backlash. So lots going on with ads in ChatGPT, apps in ChatGPT, and we're going to be discussing all of that today. In terms of the first topic that we want to get into is actually just to give a little bit of context on what we know so far about ads in ChatGPT. And I can just share this post by Tybor that talks about something that he'd seen in the ChatGPT ecosystem, actually within the app on the Android side, and this is in beta, and he basically has seen a number of references to different types of ads. So you can see here, it's got things like bizarre content, search ads, carousel. So actually, Vince, I think this is even similar in structure to how the app widgets as well. Maybe you can comment on that. But then they've also mentioned that Sam, it's funny, previously had said, his stance was that apps are a last resort, they're uniquely unsettling. And then, last podcast that he did about, well, actually it was recently, earlier this month, I think just recording it was in November, so the 5th of December now, he said he finds it somewhat distasteful, but not a non-starter. And I think what's definitely clear is OpenAI needs revenue. They are in desperate need of finding some way to get to the point where they are able to at some point cover their $1 trillion spend commitments. But they're in a very different position than the other labs. So, Google, XAI, Claude is obviously heavily funded, but Meta, they have a huge amount of revenue. So they're cash flow positive and they're able to chuck a load of money at this, and no one's relying on the ad side, but OpenAI very much is. They also had a couple of other things that they mentioned around the CEO of applications, also sort of having a company-wide meeting, looking at advertising and understanding the benefits. And what's quite interesting is there's actually been a huge amount of staff that have come over from Meta, including the CEO of applications, to the OpenAI and ChatGPT team. Apparently, they actually have an internal Slack group that is just focused on Meta people. So we'll leave you guys to judge what you think of that. But those people obviously know a huge amount about ads. Meta is the huge ad platform, biggest in the world, and one of. And I think that's also interesting. As an anecdote, they have some of the best in the ads game as part of their company, and it's definitely coming. So, when do we think ads will come? We've also got Code Red that I think we mentioned. So, I'm not going to ask the question. So, Vince, I think one thing that everyone is reflecting on is, how are ads going to appear? And there is this general narrative and discussion around when ads come. OpenAI is understood to be information, and it is understood to be a trustworthy source. And if you are going to go to ChatGPT, you are going to get the answer that truly answers your question. Obviously, the second that isn't true, you have this huge issue with trust and people not actually getting the response that they should. So I think it's very interesting to discuss, okay, like what are the options here? How do we think ads will appear? And what are the different options that do we think they have for doing the display and they might pop up?
I think what we're seeing here is OpenAI wants to create an experience for businesses and advertisers that are used to working with Google Ads, Meta Ads in a way that they can understand. If you can go up, you'll see stuff like the content carousel, specific target markets. Right? So they will probably get a very similar experience. I think what we don't know, and I think OpenAI will be wise to not go too fast, is that it does need to be a different and more nuanced experience what we're used to in a Google search. They'll create a similar experience for advertisers, recommendations, similar cost per click. That's very clear from what we're seeing from these API endpoints. What has to be different is the experience for users. There isn't a precedent in how you advertise with an agent with high context, high personalization, high trust. Google feels generic. ChatGPT is something that is very personal. You're putting a lot of your information in there. It's going to have a different dynamic with the user. So that's something they're going to have to figure out. So how soon are we going to see ads? I think OpenAI is very aware of this. They cannot roll out too fast. Probably doing a lot of product testing, a lot of consumer testing to try to find a new formula that doesn't exist yet.
As you said, this is a new paradigm of information and therefore a new paradigm of how ads need to be displayed. And they will, and they're, I've been totally aware of this, they are going to fall flat on their face if they impact the answer. So actually, I think there is multiple ways that you could potentially see ads happening within ChatGPT if we take a step back and just think like, what are the options that they have here? They, you have the answer that comes in. And broadly, there's two different ways that I'm seeing, at least at the moment. You are either going to put something in that answer or you're going to put something around the answer. So if it's in the answer, it is going to be, you can imagine an answer going down in the same way you have the sources that would come as part of a response. But if it's an advertisement, obviously we'll talk about advertising laws, but you are going to have to ensure that when that is put in the chat, it is very clear that it's an ad and it doesn't actually affect the answer. I think that's the really key point. You will have an answer if it is not clear that it is either an ad, illegal. I think it's really important to bear that in mind. That I really do not think that will happen. I don't think it can happen. If though it changes the answer and gives you an answer that it wouldn't normally give because someone has paid for an ad, that is failure. I think that is an option, but I do not think that will win. So I think, will we see an answer and will we see an injection of an ad around that answer in the text? Maybe. I think that's probably the most direct way they could try and convert people because it's sort of like in the text, right? The alternative option is it's outside the text. Like, what do I mean by outside? It's either going to be under, right? So it's completely outside, and we'll talk about how they're displaying apps right now. It's just been a whole debate on X in a bit. Or they're going to have it on like the side or as a pop-up or something like this. They're going to have to make the decision on that because if it's a pop-up, it might feel slightly separate. It's almost this balance of like it feeling related and it being relevant with it not being in the answer. So it is difficult. I think that the other thing that they're going to really have to think about is improving and making sure that algorithm is really strong. Because one thing that's going to really turn people off is if they have an answer and they get an ad in whatever form it takes. I think it'll be the latter, by the way, something outside of the response, at least at the start. And it's something that is just not related to the query. People hate this. People absolutely hate it. If you go to Meta right now, right, and you go on Instagram, that's how it used to be, right? And people used to hate ads. Now, actually, I've chatted to some people, including actually some of the people in our community we're referencing this. They actually don't mind ads. And the reason they don't mind ads is because they find stuff that is really useful. Like they actually buy stuff through these ads, right? So if you have the recommendation engine, but it's powerful enough to make them useful, I think that is interesting. But obviously they're very early. And I think final point would be people, it almost feels like people feel differently about the response that you're getting through OpenAI and these chatbots than Google. OpenAI is and AI is seen as God-like information. Everyone just takes it verbatim because it answers your question in a matter-of-fact way. Different from Google, you are asking it for information to then go to the information source. So those are two separate things, and I think that's why the trust needs to really be there. So if they mess it up, it'll also be a bit more of a headache for them. So I think they, like you said, they do need to move it out slowly.
And I think we can be 100% sure that advertisements in any LLM are going to be more personalized than what we've already experienced, which, Google is already hyper-personalizing. You Google a flight to Hong Kong, and then every page you see afterwards, the advertisements for flights to Hong Kong, right? But if you're enabling the memory OpenAI keeps on you and understands, almost every detail about your life. We talk about our most intimate relationships, right? We consider ChatGPT to be our therapist. And then you add an advertising layer on that. On one side, that's very interesting. On the other side, that could be too much. And like you say, some people might enjoy that, some people might not. I think they're going to have to figure out a way for users to also give their preferences in a smart way. And you do see that already with Google, right? Do you want this hyper personalized advertising or not? If not, you're going to see more generic. If yes, you're going to see those flights to Hong Kong or like, relationship therapists in your area based off of you talking about your relationship problems. So it's going to get hyper personalized. Would expect there to be some control because not everyone wants that.
And as you said, I think it will have it similar to the way that people have had to set this is across Google and Meta as well. And we were speaking about the rollout just then and expected timelines for this. We did have the announcement that was actually by Sam Altman this week. So we're recording this on the 5th of December. This article came out, or this statement came out a few days ago, where they basically have declared code red. I think I quite enjoyed it when they said that statement because it really did sound quite like, I mean, but it is a major issue. So they really need to sort it. In short, Gemini 3 got released. Claude Opus 4.5 has also been released.
Oh,
Both of them have smashed benchmarks and are definitely impacting ChatGPT's usage. And I want to show some stats around that. And there's a clear reason as to why they've been so exaggerated with this statement. In just a few weeks, you've had Gemini 3 get released. You've had Claude and Anthropic come out with Opus 4.5. Both models have smashed benchmarks. But what's also important to mention is it is not just that performance has improved. OpenAI has actually seen a drastic change in usage. So you can actually see here that in the last 2 weeks since the Gemini launch, GPT's unique daily active users over a 7-day average is down 6%. So they are directly seeing the impact to this for the first time. And I know, Vince, we were just discussing this. This is just the closed models. IMI, DeepSeek just came out with a new model. So competition is fierce. And I think at least I can speak for what I'm seeing. There is OpenAI is doing a huge amount. They've got the agent kit. We're going to talk about apps in a bit. They've got multiple different models. So there's a ton of stuff going on, and I think basically what this statement said was that they're at a critical time for ChatGPT. They're facing slowing growth, stronger competition. There also was apparently this internal Slack memo where Sam basically directed more employees to work on improving ChatGPT for the 800 million users they had, with these sort of code red priorities, including things like personalizing the chatbot so each person can customize how it interacts with them. I think also he's mentioned improving the image gen model. So having an improving model behavior, sort of boosting speed and reliability, minimizing over refusals as well. And that's obviously coming off the back of, Gemini now have their AI studio. You can prompt just within Gemini and it will see your response, choose which model, including an image. And by the way, Nano Banana, Gemini's image model, is arguably the best in the world. Incredibly good and far better than OpenAI's. The other thing that was also mentioned is because of this code red announcement, ads is getting delayed. So the company has been testing, but hasn't sort of publicly acknowledged this information. So everything we were discussing already is a bit, you know, things that we are guessing, but you can clearly see them. And also AI agents, Pulse, plans to release new models are also, I think potentially delayed as well. So
oh,
quite
oh,
interesting news.
OpenAI, they own the verb GPT, right? Just like Google owns the word for searching something on the internet. They are going to stay a market leader just because of that. That said, I think they recognize the threat, especially Google, where we also are very familiar with the ecosystem. Lots of us have Gmails. We're doing a lot on the Google space. And if we start to discover the benefits using Gemini and making that our main agent we interact with, that's a real threat. Over time, they may lose kind of the customers that verb ChatGPT and just go to chatgpt.com for everything. So I think it makes sense if you're going to start advertising and increasing revenue at a time where competition is so fierce and it's really kind of the race to who has the model that is the verb at this point in time to try to lock in, let's be clear, also a big consumer market segment, right? Where we're I think businesses is a bit of a separate discussion, which also should be talked about. But for that consumer segment, you got to have the best model and you got to retain kind of that brand verb. And then over time, probably in 1 to 2 years, when that is kind of locked in and solidified, that's when you're probably going to start to see ways that they're going to monetize either through creating apps. We're going to talk about that in a moment, advertisements, increasing the token price, things like this, subscriptions.
And like you said, this verb is interesting, right? We live in a bubble. We are more at the forefront of this stuff. If you ask the majority of the world at this point what AI is, AI just equals ChatGPT. So we're talking about a consumer perspective, but there is no differentiation between the two. In fact, there is no other AI that exists, as honestly how I think about it. And I really believe the rest of the world does. OpenAI, well, more ChatGPT is AI.
Chat is
But
just becoming the verb, right? When you say, let's
chat,
ask chat.
and it's the same, right? Just Google it, ask chat, ask ChatGPT. These are, like you said, becoming a verb, and I think it's super important, but that does not last forever. They do have this sort of like walled garden, but only if they continue to improve. At some point, the best product wins, right? So, you have to make sure that happens. And like you said, Gemini, Google just have insane distribution advantage. They have the AI results that are coming into Google now. And all that means is that more people click into those and then get onboarded into the Gemini experience. So that is a really big deal. But I think that's obviously, to talk about the ad effort, no surprise that they're having to delay it. One theory that I have here is, and I referenced to already, you have to understand the structure of these companies and the financial position they're in. OpenAI is not generating anywhere near the revenues that their spend commitments align to. They've got over $1 trillion in spend commitments. I think the last time, I don't want to misquote this, but I do believe it's around 19 billion in revenue and increasing, but nonetheless, nowhere near where their commitments should be. And that is a very, very different position from Google. Google is smashing every single earnings, is spending a huge amount of CapEx, but CapEx that they have, and they are not in a position where they are forced to take ads right now at all. So they are actually in a privileged position where they can, it's not a race they can win. OpenAI is going to have to and is going to be forced to find revenue as these investors aren't just going to keep paying. And they're going to have to get it really, really right. And it's going to have to be really, really additive because there is going to be a chunk of people that don't like it. And if they don't have a good experience, they will go to the next chatbot. And there's going to be this window where OpenAI is going to have to run ads. And then Gemini, Grok, Meta, these companies are then going to sort of pick up potentially some of the people that choose to move over. Now, my prediction is I believe that every single one of these will start to run ads. That I'd almost say would be a fact. I'd be very surprised if it didn't happen. And every single one of these companies will have apps within their ecosystems. But I do think that, sure, they've delayed it. They need to focus on improving the model, but I think it's inevitable. I don't think it's going to be that far off. And I think that they are, Google and these other big AI companies are in a great position because they can just watch OpenAI do this rollout, see what works, see what doesn't, capture some of the users, and then turn on ads when they choose.
Valley company, early stage.
Well, it depends. I mean, there are a huge amount of multiple on earnings, and if you look at the valuation and the PE ratio compared to your Google and these other AI companies, it's way higher evaluation compared to earnings. So it's still pretty punchy, but
I think they
yeah,
could they
also
could
going to
probably 5x this over the next few years, right? So if they get to 100 billion, of course, the valuation can get much higher.
yeah, exactly. They're talking about an IPO. This is sort of a separate conversation, but they're talking about an IPO that would be at $1 trillion. So, and I think that was discussed. I don't know when that will happen. Probably, maybe not for a while. So who knows? Maybe they get revenue ups by then. But anyway, I think one other topic that is interesting is there's been a huge amount of confusion related to this ad topic over the last couple of days. So there has been circulating on X, and I can just share my screen and show some examples here. There's been a huge amount of discussion about this sharing on X, which is talking about examples of what people think within ChatGPT. So you can see here that someone has had a response, and then what's happened is they have been given a what looks like an ad below. And there's a couple of things to mention here. One is the fact that an ad is, or what looks like an ad is there. There is something that's been promoted that is there. The second thing to call out is the fact that this doesn't look anything to do with the topic of conversation. So that's what people have been discussing is, we've got this ad, like there's Peloton there, right? But then the other thing that is happening is it's happening in a conversation that's completely not related. So people have been discussing this. I'll show you another example as well. There is this one here, which is for Target, and they have got, okay, can you see? Yeah. So the other one is for Target. So again, it was a similar experience where they've got this ad that has popped up, but then it doesn't really seem like there is much to do with the actual topic. They're talking about Windows BitLocker, right? And I want to call out a couple of things here because I've written a pretty extensive piece on X and LinkedIn about this. These are not apps. So these applications. So there are right now the beginning of the release of applications within OpenAI. Maybe Vincent, you could just bring up your ChatGPT and just kind of show some examples of the apps that are already there, and we can bring that up on the screen. Do you mind doing that? There are don't have VPN on. There are around 15 different apps that are available right now, and these are apps that enabling you to basically improve the experience to do your query within an LLM. So you can see here there's already a ton of apps that are available there. In short, this is the experience where people will be able to have their query aided with an application rather than just being stuck in the UI, which is information. So this is something someone can choose to do. And what's happening is they are testing distribution within these LLMs. So actually what's interesting is there was OpenAI even replied to this statement, and they'd mentioned that it is in fact, let me just go down, it is in fact not an ad, and they are basically testing this to give distribution to these applications. Now, there's been a lot of debate around this. And I think what's clear is people, even if it's not an ad, they are feeling like it is an ad. So I think I want to call out a couple of points on my perspective on this. The first is there is this goes back to the conversation we were having at the start, which is they're going to have to be really, really, really careful around where these things are placed, even if it is organic distribution, which it is. Because by the way, how these platform opportunities always work is OpenAI is trying to get third-party developers to build on top of their platform. Why? Because it opens up the use cases and makes ChatGPT more useful. That's why I don't believe that Code Red is going to affect rollout. I believe they're going to focus on app rollout because they want developers, because developers leads to more users. What they want is they want to give those developers organic, free distribution. So that's why they're showing these apps. You'll notice none of the displays here are anything that isn't an app in the connector app store already. The challenge that they need to think of is how can, and by the way, I think it's worth saying the way they're currently displayed also is probably the best it could be. So it's not in the conversation. It's that, the ad options we were discussing at the start. This is at the end. not part of the conversation, just ideally additive to it. But the challenge is that they really do need to think and make sure that it is completely relevant to the chat that's actually happening. What we're seeing with some of these examples is it's obviously not relevant. So, they're getting, for example, in this case, they've asked for a consumer product and they're showing Target, right? It's like, well, you're not going to find Windows BitLocker in a Target store. Um, you're also like, you've just asked about a podcast that Elon was on, and you have, let me just bring that back up. You've asked a podcast around what Elon was on, and then you're getting Peloton, right? Why? Well, actually, what's happening here is because in that podcast, he's mentioned something around fitness. So you're now seeing Peloton, right? All this says to me is just we're very early, right? They are going to have to improve and make sure that, like we said, it is going to be very relevant. The application needs to be very relevant to the conversation that is happening. I think also the other reason this is happening is because they're trying to like test distribution with some users, but they only have 15 applications to do it. When they have all of these different applications to promote, I think it's going to be fine. But we'll see how it evolves. The only other thing to call out is we are at a time where OpenAI is trying to figure out promotion of its distribution, organic distribution, and ads. They're very like Google, right? People game SEO, people want to become found, people do that whole piece. By the way, it's already happening in AI, but they've had to figure out how AI. So I think like my bet would be they're going to have these apps, they're going to be positioned there, they need to be more relevant. But then what's going to happen is they're going to have to be some sort of like different display for when it's actually an ad so that users are very clear like, oh, that's meant to be helpful, it's an app, it's not an ad. And they're going to have to think of some sort of different UI not to confuse people further.
I'm sure that we'll figure that out. We'll get to a point where we actually built a resource to start studying this, attached on ChatGPT, and we're trying to just collect information on how these apps work. And you can see here, want to book a hotel in New York, November 2nd to 4th. There's a very clear intent. I want to do something, right? I want to book a class or spinning, right? It'll answer the way we're used to. This is the conversational answer. And then what you see is discover and compare hotels or flights, connect Expedia. So this is, we know this is not an ad. Uh, why do we know this? There are laws in place. I think I need to reshare a different tab. I'll quickly do it. I think it's interesting to show. The FTC in the US, not to mention the more strict privacy rules in Europe. When do you have to disclose? It's if you get any of these, right? Payments, products, discounts. Even if Expedia is giving Sam Altman a discount, they have to disclose that. But when you look at the UI, you don't really see any language would meet, I think an FTC inspector's requirements on is there any sort of value transfer going from Expedia to OpenAI? At least now it's unclear. So we have to default to the assumption that this is some sort of fair marketplace. OpenAI is going to allow apps to appear in some sort of transparent manner based off of what the user's intent desires. So, I want to book a hotel in New York, would very likely want to do that with Expedia. This is creating an experience. OpenAI is not directly benefiting in terms of direct revenue. Now, why Expedia, right? It does feel like an app. You see the logo. Like if I type something into Google and there's like a logo, book something on Expedia, somehow it would feel a bit like an ad. But also, we have created some sort of expectation with Google that the top search results are what I want, right? Like even though Expedia probably invested a huge amount to be at the top of the rankings, it's not an ad. So maybe they're going to try to make that sort of feeling come. And I think one thing they might want to do is show more than one. So you have Expedia, and you might have Booking, and you might have like, I don't know, Kayak, something that's smaller. And maybe you even see a little button that says more options, right? Because that way it feels like there's some sort of fair choice to the consumer and it doesn't feel so much as an advertisement. And then if you click, and this is something we've noticed through some testing, is if you interact with an app, then that is saved in your memory and it will more likely pop up in the future. So it's kind of an understanding, okay, Elliot, you like to book with Expedia, that's something that's going to pop up more frequently because that's how you like to, achieve your intents for travel booking. If you're a Peloton user, you'll probably see that app pop up more. So almost like you have apps on your iPhone, right? I think we're going to probably see some sort of like click to make it part of my GPT experience, and then that's going to kind of build up in your profile over time.
Yeah, totally. And I think it's a good point, which is this challenge they've got. I was surprised with the amount of backlash that came from this on X. It's a certain section of the community, but like what is for sure, people hate ads. So they need to really figure out a way that this discovery mechanism to support third-party developers, applications, and also improve the experience. That's the point here. It's nicer for you to not leave ChatGPT and just book through Xperia. That's the idea. This sort of organic placement needs to feel different in some way. Like you said, if there's multiple, it's almost like if there was multiple and you actually had an ad there, you'd you'd kind of then feel like, okay, like I'm getting some value here from these clearly non like purposely placed applications. I think it's a good point. And we'll see. I think at the start, obviously, they're going to have a limited number of apps as well. So that's kind of currently what they're managing. But it is a difficult challenge for them because, like we mentioned earlier, there is so much trust in the answers that are happening right now. And the second that these ads are here and they're not on these other platforms, people are going to have a think about where they spend time. Is that the only way we've seen apps be displayed? By the way,
Maybe
like we've not seen like an app, sorry, pop up in a different way.
there's two ways to an app opening. One is
Maybe I'll ask: is there any other way we've seen an app be promoted so far? Is I've only seen it where it's just below the answer.
there's two ways to get into an app in ChatGPT interface. One is like we just showed you with that Expedia example or the kind of incorrect recommendations we see on X where it pops up in the chat. And then maybe to show you the whole experience, you will then click and it will actually have up, which allows you to connect. And with some services, you may need to log in, right? With Expedia, they don't require a login. They just show you results and then they'll actually navigate you to Expedia to complete a booking. Another way would be, and let me just quickly get into, for instance, Target. You want to work with that app. So you can see there it do your chat input. And then the ChatGPT will understand, okay, look, I don't have to mention Target. Let's shop snacks for a cozy movie night. And the app just directly pops up. You've already done that sort of connection. It's connected and it will be kind of a preference app for lack of a better word. And you don't have to click, open with the Target app the way you saw with Expedia. Well, those are
Yeah,
the only two ways I've seen that, you could actually get into an app widget inside ChatGPT right now. Either it's kind of organically or whatever, we don't know exactly right now how that's recommended, or you specifically have that connection and you explicitly mention that you want to work with that.
yeah. And obviously, you're going to have the App Store, Connector Store. We have seen, by the way, and I think it's worth also showing this. OpenAI and I don't know how this is mentioned on Test Catalog. I think Test Catalog is generally a very good resource. But I just want to kind of highlight that we have seen some. I'll just copy the screenshot. Yeah, we have seen some early releases on them. The fact that they're changing the sort of like mentioning of connectors to apps. So this is sort of happening now, and then you can browse apps. So it's sort of going in that direction of it being an app store. And something that I think is really important to mention, because I have a slightly different take, I think that's generally around a sort of like ad debate. I just see this as a huge opportunity. You can now get organic distribution with people's directly and highly intended query and promote your app. And they're giving it away for free. This is just like ASO when you're optimizing for the App Store with iPhone. It is just like SEO. It is just like AEO, optimizing for Google or search engines, you will be able to optimize to get your app displayed. It is a huge opportunity. And what they will do, like with these different distribution plays, like we've already studied, and we'll do another detailed session on this, I think, is they will give third-party developers a big promotion at the start before they then do the ad placements. So you want to be early on that wave. And by the way, like Vincent mentioned, when someone connects to this app and they use this app, it will likely be saved in their memory in some form. So there is a huge prize for getting found by people and it becoming part of their workflows. Because if you then say, create me a presentation, and they've created that presentation with the Canva app, when you then say create a presentation again, it's likely going to promote Canva, particularly if you've used the app and you like it and you have it a lot, right? It's going to sort of remember and build up that memory. So I think it's a space to watch if you're building apps, if you have a consumer focused app, or even if you have a B2B use case that you think businesses would use, you've got to be thinking about how can I start to optimize for discoverability within these responses.
We coin a new term right here, CAEO, chat engine optimization.
Yeah, I think we should. I think we definitely should. Can we make it like a 3-character?
Something that
CSO,
I,
chat
I,
search optimization.
I do find like the apps, it's recognizable, it's catchy, it'll probably over time people will understand it. It is a very generic term. So when you're going to Google ChatGPT apps, right now you're just going to get a whole bunch of wrappers, actual apps you put on your iPhone. I think it'll take a while for people to realize, oh, these are apps inside ChatGPT.
Yeah,
It,
totally.
it, it is going to take some time, and over time we'll probably start to think, oh yeah, GPT apps means apps in ChatGPT. Yeah,
Yeah.
it'll be
And
it'll
I
be
think
hard
it's
to get
really
a
important to
three-letter one.
mention. Yeah, we'll see. But we should term it for sure. And I think one thing to mention is this is different from AEO. So the way to get discovered, right, is different from the tactics that you need to use. There's going to be some overlap, but the things that are important here, like the naming, like the metadata that you put into the application, like the prompts that you promote during the application process. There's a ton of different stuff that we're learning at the moment about this. These are new and different tactics. This is not just AEO. So it is going to be a new paradigm, a whole new discoverability piece here. And yeah, staying at the forefront of that research to kind of figure out, okay, what's needed for the best possible discoverability. And we'll also be sharing what we learn on that. I think that's a wrap. So that's everything we wanted to cover. Lots of exciting stuff going on. We'll for sure be doing more sessions like this on new releases when we get them. We'll also put in the comments a resource we made called apps on chatgpt.com. It is a resource that includes every single public app on the App Store to date. It includes ways that you can actually test the app in a simulator so you can see how it works, understand the ways they're designing. It also includes things on how to build with them, how to get discoverability. So we will, like I said, share the links to the comments. There's a community in there. We'd love to see you in there. And I think that's it for this week.